Hey everyone, welcome to Mark and Mark again. Back to my house, still in lockdown, still restricted. Hope you're doing okay. We're in Mark chapter 2 and continuing on here in verse 18. We're told now John's disciples, this is John the Baptist, John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. That is, they were going without food. Maybe for a long time, maybe just for a day or part of a day. But either way, they were not eating. And the reason why, it was linked with grief and it was linked with sorrow. That is, it was to do with death and sin. Maybe you were repenting for your own sin, or you were sorrowful for the sin of your people, or you were grieving the death of someone you loved. Anywhere in there was a time for fasting. And then we're told the people came to him, that's Jesus, and they asked him, why did John's disciples and the Pharisees' disciples fast, but your disciples do not fast? Now, it's interesting to know that the Old Testament law only prescribed fasting once a year. You kind of have the idea that it was all the time, that the Jews were supposed to fast a lot, but no, it was only on the Day of Atonement is the only time that God commanded them to fast. We're told in Zechariah chapter 8, verse 19, that they fasted 4 times a year. And in Esther chapter 9, verse 31, we're told there was another fast. So that's 5. But it's not often. It's 5, maybe 6 times a year. And these two, Zechariah and Esther, are towards the end of Israel's history. And in the law itself, God only commands it once. The Pharisees fasted twice a week. That's 100 times a year. And the reason why is because they wanted to show their piety. They wanted to show their commitment. They wanted to show how religious they were, how committed to God's commands they were. But God had never commanded them to fast 100 times a year. He had commanded them to fast once a year. And so the question is, why don't your disciples, Jesus, show their religious commitment in the way that we think they should? Jesus' answer in verse 19, he says, the wedding guests cannot fast while the groom is with them, can they? As long as they have the groom, they cannot fast. The point of this is that when you're at a wedding, when the groom is here, it's a time of joy. It's not a time of grief or sorrow. And so when Jesus is around, it's the wrong time to fast, because Jesus has come to get rid of death and sin. That's why he's come. And so it doesn't make sense to fast when the groom is here. It's the wrong time. It's a time of joy. But he says, verse 20, there will come a time when the groom is taken away and they will fast in that day. And what he means by this is the cross. There will be a time where Jesus is dead, and then it'll be a time of grief and sorrow. And then he illustrates this point with 2 images. The first one, no one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, otherwise the new patch pulls away from the old cloth and a worse tear is made. We don't really live in that kind of world, but the idea is easy enough. You have a hole in a jacket and you sew a patch on it. If that patch hasn't shrunk, then you sew it on and then it shrinks, it'll rip off and make the hole bigger. That makes sense? Then he says, the second image, no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins and the wine is lost, but new wine is for fresh wineskins. Now, again, this isn't really the world that we live in, but the idea is new wine continues to ferment, it continues to produce gas. And so if you put that new wine into an old wineskin, it's going to continue to expand. But if that wineskin's already expanded as much as it can, then when that new wine ferments in there, it's going to burst the whole thing, kind of like blowing up a balloon too much until it bursts. It's like that. And the point that Jesus makes, the point of both of these images, the patch and the wine, is that the kingdom that Jesus is bringing does not equal Judaism. That the new wine of the kingdom can't be poured into the old wineskin of Israel's current religious system. That Jesus has come to bring something new. He hasn't come just to sew a patch on Israel's religious practices. He's come to bring something new and different and apart from all of these religious practices. And so you can understand why there was so much conflict between Jesus and the religious leaders, because he had come to do something fundamentally new. Well, that's all for this time. We'll see you next time.